Cool. I think we are going to kick off the session. So thank you guys all for being here. You can hear us if you want, come in. But I guess, so really quickly, I'm Craig. I'm the co-chair of the growth track for Denver Startup Week. Hopefully this will be the most that you hear from me all day. But I just want to say, like, on a personal note, to say that I'm excited for this discussion is like a crazy understatement. I've admired Jed and the Topo Designs brand for like a decade, so much so that I named my dog Topo. Elliot, I think, is one of the most talented entrepreneurs in the state. Honestly, he hasn't spent any money on advertising, hasn't raised any capital, and runs a business that does millions a year. Steven, I work at Crocs, and we look at what VF and the team at North Face did with Gucci as sort of a shining example of a collaboration. And then Mike and the team at BarkBox obviously are just incredible leaders in the space. So having blown up all their spots and explained how excited I am, I'm going to pass it off to them to introduce themselves, and we'll kick it off.
Yeah, thanks for having us here, Craig. And my name is Jed Rose, and I'm one of the owners and co-founder of a company called Topo Designs here in Colorado. I live in Fort Collins. We have a office here in Denver and have several retail locations here in Denver as well. I kind of, just a little history on me. I mostly have been in the graphic design and branding and marketing world before Topo. I got a degree in sculpture, which if any of you have a degree in sculpture, you know it's not super marketable out there in the world. So I pivoted like pretty quickly at the end of my college career and ended up going into design. So did that for a long part of my career, and then really never had any intention of being an entrepreneur, but really loved the idea of this sort of like new outdoor space that I saw as an opportunity in the outdoor industry, and ended up just kind of working away at that problem. Bought a sewing machine and some fabric, and made some backpacks. And 15 years later, we're here doing this. So that's a little bit about me.
My name is Elliot Wilkinson Ray. I started Ripton. We're a high-performance denim company. So we basically create denim garments for active lifestyles, like a lot of ski and bike focused uses. And we're only 3 years old, still super new, and just stoked to kind of learn and listen to these guys.
Hey everyone, my name's Steven Youngblade. I work at the North Face. I've been with the brand for about 8 years now, so part of the contingent that moved from California here to Denver about 3 years ago. And yeah, it's a lot of my professional life and references have oriented around the outdoors, and it's truly been an honor to work for a heritage brand, an iconic brand in that space. And I think even this last few years, we've really seen a lot of new people coming to the outdoors, whether that be because they found the outdoors as a place for safety during the pandemic, or it's just something that they've recently discovered. And the North Face is kind of a lucky brand because a lot of people know of it, and it happens to be the first brand that they kind of experience as an outdoor brand in many cases. So one of the fun things that I get to work on and spend a lot of my time on is how do you communicate with all these different people that love the brand and love the outdoors, from hardcore skiers to people who only heard about us from a Gucci North Face collab. So it's a lot of fun.
Thanks. I'll round it out. Hey guys, I'm Mike Tevellini. I'm with Bark. We are a dog-centric community. Most people know us from our subscription business, BarkBox, which is about 10 years old. Over that time, since that time, we've opened up 3 other subscription businesses. Super Chewer, which is more of a subscription for more durable dog toys and treats. Bright, which is a dental product, and then most recently food. We've also expanded during that time into most major retailers at this point. My role within the organization, I'm the Director of Growth Strategy and Performance, which is really a cross-functional role overseeing things from product development, marketing, logistics, all the way through site experience, and ultimately the consumer experience in physical product. So happy to be here. and learn from these guys.
Well, awesome. So we've got a lot to cover, the uses of collabs, the process, where things sort of break down, the future of the space. And so we've got a lot of questions for the panelists. And obviously at the end of each section, we'll everybody can kind of ask questions sort of throughout. But just by a show of hands for, why you're here, how many of you are starting businesses and collabs seem to be a part of that? Okay, so a lot of early stage. How many of you work at companies that do collabs, are sort of marketers or product developers at bigger companies? Okay, cool. And then any other show of hands? Anyone else here for a specific reason other than maybe a job at Topo or something like that? All right, sweet. So I guess sort of to kick it off, obviously there's been a big evolution and shift in the ways that brands sort of pursue collaborations, why they do it. I think I mentioned at Crocs, it's been a big sort of driver of growth. But I know 15 years ago when you said you were making backpacks in your garage and you started out early with collabs, I think you've got a really kind of unique perspective, Jed, on kind of the evolution of sort of this sort of tent pole over the last decade or so. Can you just kind of kick it off by talking about some of the changes you've seen overall?
Yeah, I think, especially like in the outdoor space, those brands were really slow to adapt to the collab landscape. And I think it was more that a lot of those companies just really didn't work together a lot. I mean, you can probably speak to that even more, but like from my perspective, I still don't really feel like I'm part of the outdoor industry, so I'm still going to talk to them as like them, even though I'm probably a part of it now. But I would say that it was a pretty hyper competitive space, and this idea that like working together to make a product together is just like really foreign to that space. So when we were coming in, we were looking at more probably, at that time, sneaker culture was a really big thing that I was interested in, and I think that was probably like the original establishment of a lot of the collabs that were happening in the world. And so we looked at that and really sort of wanted to apply that a little bit to our space, which we always kind of sit on the periphery of the outdoor space as well. But I even remember like one of my favorite collabs of all time was one of my friends growing up. Their parents had the Eddie Bauer Ford Explorer, right? Like that thing was epic, and it was so ahead of its time to like pull those two brands together and do a product. But it really sort of like transformed my thinking about two brands working together. So I think, it's been going on for a really long time, but when we first started doing it, it was good enough to just do one product or maybe two products, one from each brand, and do a different colorway and maybe put a different label on there, and sort of blew people's minds. And the evolution of where it's come to, the size of the line of North Face Gucci collab now sort of sets the bar in terms of collabs in general. So I think it's really cool that it's evolved that much, but I would say that it has evolved quite substantially. And I think, consumer expectations for collabs are also pretty high right now. To get people hyped on something is much, much harder, just because there are so many in the world and so many different, different industries too, whether it's like footwear to beer to food to whatever. Like it seems like any industry that's consumer facing right now is really in on this idea of two brands or two companies working together on it. So I think it's cool, but it has really evolved quite substantially over time. Anything to add to the context?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I think the one thing I was thinking about when you said that is that that sneaker culture does feel like kind of the start of that collab trend, if you will. But one of the things that I'm seeing right now is that it's not just about driving commerce; it's about driving cultural conversation in any one moment. And so, for me, the first of this kind that did it really well, where it wasn't just a new product offering, but it was something tapping into culture, was the Spideyverse movie. I don't know if you know that movie. It's an animated movie. It's the best Spider-Man I think there is. But Nike actually placed their product in that movie with Jordans. They released those Jordans the same week that movie came out. And so there was this moment in time, and now you see this all over the place with Stranger Things or whatever it is. And so it does feel like this shift has gone from more of a driver of commerce to driver of conversation, which I think is really interesting. It also there's a big tension there too, because you put a big old timestamp on your product, and can create this self-fulfilling prophecy to need another thing for the next cultural moment. But yeah, something to add there.
We'll jump into now the whys behind certain brands will pursue collaborations, and I think we'll start with Gucci and North Face. But before that, any questions on the evolution, uses, things like that? Go for it.
Yeah, just repeating the question. Is it like product alignment, like doing a collab with a brand with similar products versus dissimilar products?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we tend to reach out to companies that do things differently than us or make products that we don't necessarily make. And that tends to add a lot of interest to it too, because they're not, I guess our consumer isn't necessarily looking at us to make a hard goods piece or something that is sort of like outside of our expertise. So not only do we learn a lot about that product working with them and the process that goes into it, I think that's a big part of what we'll dive into next is like we as a company learn a lot from other companies too. So it's really good for us to work with other companies by doing that. But I think from a consumer standpoint, to have, you know, a Topo stamp on something that we wouldn't make forever in our lifespan is always pretty interesting to consumers. So we tend to go that route rather than, you know, make something that's super similar to us because we could make it as a brand anyway, right?
Yeah, and I'll add to that. So for Bark, I mean, really any company you could list, we could probably have a partnership with because the humans of those products, probably 50% of them have a dog, right? And so we and I think we'll get into a little bit of this of like we're pretty disciplined in what we look for in a partnership and what we're trying to actually accomplish. So we do float out or like get a lot of asks. We do float out a lot of things on social media, like, hey, would people be interested in a product if we were to do this? You know, I know, you know, what started the connection with Craig here is, you know, BarkBox really, we've floated out in social media a campaign to get Crocs for dogs. Still haven't gotten it. We're close, I think, much closer than where we were, but that is a little bit of a like attention, viral, you know, how do we get people on board? But truly that then also checks the box for my end on the acquisition side because I know dogs want Crocs and I want my dog to have Crocs. So that's a huge aspect for our organization of what are we trying to accomplish. And we actually have a partnership with Subaru who, you know, as we're talking about car relationships, we're in every Subaru dealership as they position themselves as the car brand for dog people. And so there's a natural alignment there for us as a lot of our employees have Subarus.
So you've started to touch on the whys behind different brands will pursue collaborations. Sometimes it's to know what another company is doing internally. Other times for Bark, it's more of a, you know, customer acquisition play or brand awareness play. There's a cultural component. But given that this is Startup Week and a lot of the audience is sort of building companies early on, Elliot, I want to pass it off to you to tell the Ripton story and particularly how you guys pursued a recent collab, the whys behind it, when the right time to pursue it was. Give us a little color on your recent work.
Yeah, I think we've been so tiny that it's actually important to kind of, if you're starting a new company, to let people know that you're that small, I think, because if people think you're huge, like the customer just communicates with you differently. And so our first collab was with a women's hatwear brand from Vermont, which is where I'm from. And they were a little bigger than us, but it just sort of like the DNA of the two brands like worked well together. And we were able to kind of communicate on the same level. I think our next one's another women's founded mountain bike brand in the Northwest that's really new, even younger than us. And it just it just comes across as really kind of grassroots and small, and so the product itself is, you know, kind of raw, and I think people kind of understand where you're at, and like I think for me, it's helpful to do things that, just allow people that are just coming to your brand to understand what's actually going on with what the brand's trying to achieve, but also like where it's at in that moment. Because I found we're only 3 years old, but people really like to be along for the ride. When like your high school student getting their first car or something, like when you open your first store, like people like to kind of follow along. So for us, it's been, aligning in a very like micro way. And so if you're, starting a new company, that's it's just a fun process.
How, and for the group, how much of this is like a product development or thinking through new categories to extend into? And in a Croc example, we launched a high platform shoe through a collab that just took off. And so now we know there's a lot more demand for these sort of hype, shoes. In the case of Topo, are you looking to test getting into fly fishing? Are you looking to test getting into, women's, hats? How much from a product development and kind of early read goes into the process?
Yeah, I can take this. So part of the why, I think, for the North Face, and it's important, I think, to align it to just existing brand priorities, because otherwise you're just going to kind of make this thing, and then even if you get new consumers into your brand, if you're not following up on it, those consumers are probably going to drift away. And so it's really important for us to basically start the collab process the same way we would start any big multi-season, multi-year initiative, with what are the objectives in this space? How are we going to, what is the right consumer we're going to bring in with this, and are they going to stay with the brand? And we actually, we'll talk about the process in a little bit, but we kick off collab and what we call inline, or just our general product, at the same time, because we want those two things to fuel with each other. I think the most important thing is some sort of brand values alignment, and it almost goes back to your question on should product be similar or dissimilar. And I think we look for brand values alignment and that consumer that we're trying to bring into our brand, and we're making sure that once the collab is over, there's something left in our brand that they can then go on and discover, and kind of it's their gateway into the brand, if you will.
Yeah, I would say from our perspective, like this season is a good example for us. We had a bunch of content planned, as well as a collab, as well as a lot of storytelling pieces that we were doing that were all along the same sort of theme. And we did a lot of fishing stuff this season. So being able to do a collab within the fishing space with a fishing brand not only gives us legitimacy there, but also helps us tell the story a little bit more. We can shoot all the content with the collab, so it gets a lot of airtime as we're doing it in there, but it also feels a lot more legitimate if we're creating the content with people that are inside Topo or ambassadors, that we can sort of prove the concept as we're going along with it and make it feel really, really right for the brand. So yeah, I would agree with you. Like the more we can plan in a collab with the other things that we're doing for the season and initiatives that we've already said were important to us, it just amplifies that and makes it even better. So it's great that way.
I know, one thing for Bark when we spoke that I was sort of blown away by is the reliance, particularly in a licensing standpoint, of customer acquisition, right? So you're leaning on the WWE, or you're leaning on other sort of Harry Potters of the world to help with both acquisition, but also in a subscription angle, retention, right? You want to give customers an exciting thing to maintain their program for. Can you just speak to the role of collabs and licensing on acquiring new customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So where do I go with this? So we've got over 2 million subscribers on a monthly basis for BarkBox. So we've got a huge community that we tap into. But there's way more dogs out there that we want to serve, right? And so we do, and I think as you were talking about the like shared brand values, things like that, I think when we look for partnerships and licenses, it is, we chart that out 18 months in advance, which is the product development timeline for us, and it's very purposeful as to what we look to do. If it's a movie license, whatever it is, we do look at that, and we figure out what exactly would acquire new customers for us. But then also, let's not forget about our existing customers, and let's also provide a full collection to them, so that we could actually do some upsell, cross-sell of those licensed products in for our existing customers. So there is a reason to jump in. If we were launching a Harry Potter partnership, which we did last month, and we sell through all of our product, that obviously hits our goal, manages expectations from a growth perspective, skyrocket. It's paying off now, as a lot of people didn't realize. Actually, I'm going to pivot a little bit here as I say this, because a license like Harry Potter, Harry Potter has been out there for years, so how do you reinvent versus slapping a logo onto your brand too? And so it's paying off for us right now with Harry Potter because we did a sorting hat, which we didn't tell people that there was a tennis ball inside that revealed what house your dog was in. And so that's paying off on social media for us now. We have a huge collection for our existing customers with Dobby, and Dobby's got a sock inside of him that pays off. And we try to really maximize our licensing from not just acquisition, but also how do we create the best customer experience. And those partnerships mean that it's actually a true partnership where we're working with the partner, developing in tandem, and making sure that not just their brand comes through in our product, but also our brand comes through in theirs. And we call that like a shared equity that they bring to us, we bring to them. And that's frankly where probably across the board here, where a lot of those asks and those partnerships fall off the table, where this just isn't going down the right path that we want to, either creatively or pricing. Actually, that's probably the number one is pricing, and then it becomes actually does it serve what our business is looking to accomplish in the tone and voice that we would.
Stephen, for the North Face and Gucci, I've tried to get my beautiful wife Ellen to buy North Face all the time, and it wasn't until you worked with Gucci that she was interested. So I guess was that a sort of a part of the campaign as well? Can you speak to that a little more?
Yeah, this was a pretty rewarding project. I mean, I think the first thing, like where this project began, is really interesting because it goes back to that point of objectives. And just tell you all, we're focused on fishing this year. We sell a lot of jackets, and we dominate mid-market. Like probably a lot of you have like a $200 or $300 North Face jacket, but a lot of the growth is happening above us. And so there was an initiative around parkas and jackets at the brand, and there was inline products to make more premium, bring more innovation, make something that we've never done before, and then something like Gucci was part of that, of how we could elevate upwards and kind of stretch the prices of the North Face and what the North Face can sell at. Through this initiative, but it was connected to this thing that the whole brand was organized around. There was other things, so the success didn't live and die based off of that one collab. And to the previous point, hopefully, if we brought some people into the brand, they didn't find a Gucci jacket, but they found a pretty nice North Face jacket. And so I think that was the origin story for that collab. I think, regardless, though, it's really important to approach a collab with like the most like scrutiny on how your brand is portrayed, because so many people are going to see your brand for the first time, and it is kind of a shortcut into who you are. It's like it's going to get more coverage, people are going to explain it, more eyeballs are on it, so you have this one moment to communicate your brand. And with that story in particular, we spent a lot of time trying to do it authentically. I don't know if any of you saw the spot around that we released for that, but it featured the band CCR. The North Face was founded in San Francisco in '66. In 1968, we moved to Berkeley. We started making our own gear for the first time, and we shared a wall in the same factory with CCR, the band. They practiced in the space next to our factory. And so there was all of these things that we wanted to find really, really true and authentic ways to communicate what the brand is about, what our values are about, knowing that a lot of people are going to have eyeballs on this moment, and there's probably going to be a lot of skeptical eyeballs on it too. But I think for us, we approached it as like the most authentic that we could with like any other story. It just happened to get a lot more eyeballs than most of those stories would.
Awesome. So we talked a lot about sort of the uses for collabs, sort of the whys brands will pursue them. Any questions from the group to sort of go deeper on that before we jump into the process of kicking these off?
Can you talk a little bit about the misses and what can happen when you have, a collab that goes terribly wrong?
I could do that if you guys want.
Go for it.
Yeah, I could cover that. We do. Like I said, we got over 2 million customers monthly buying into inventory, buying into licensing. Forecasting is critically important. And managing those expectations, I think for the first, especially licensing, first couple of years, takes a while to understand what actually hits for your brand. If it doesn't hit, you're stuck with a lot of inventory, and how do you move through that? How do you reposition it? Do you do it sales and just clear out? Like, yeah, you do. And so it is really a management. I think, we benefit now a lot more that we talk to we've got over 500 employees. We will talk to our group and say, my biggest factor is really the, I want it factor. And so there's partnerships that we have that we kick off, or it's, if everyone in the organization wants it, then it makes sense. So we've actually worked with Topo in the past, because in office, people had the Topo chalk bag for rock climbing that a lot of dog parents have for treats. And it was like, I want that. And so it immediately kicked off a partnership where we could talk about it as like, hey, can we actually purchase some product? Let's see, can we move it through? And we move through all of our products. So it was a solid partnership for us, which we didn't pre-plan that before coming on here.
That was a good one. That wasn't a bad one.
Yeah, that was a good one. But there are you just take your time, I would say, with some of these partnerships, because jumping in, there is the risk of inventory. There also is the risk of devaluing your brand. Even just the customer, existing customers and things like that, making sure that it's actually delivering to the reason why they signed up or purchased your product in the past, that you're not deviating too far off, and you're also being transparent as to hey, we did this because it's a cool partnership, or we tried this, and all of our customer support is briefed on any partnerships, is as much as we've got partnerships that we think are as G-rated as they come. This week we're launching Blue's Clues partnership. I'm sure we'll get some complaints about that. So we prep our team so that we have the proper social response and things like that ready to go. Sorry, you're moderating, not me.
Any other stories of collabs gone wrong to touch on before jumping in other questions?
I'll just shortly say, typically collabs basically hit every single piece of your company, right? It's sales, it's product, it's design, it's marketing, it's everything. So I think that's where it goes, technically bad sometimes, is just that there's so many people involved that sometimes, one part of the group just doesn't work, or the pricing doesn't work, or the production didn't work, or the development didn't work, or you can't agree on the design or whatever. So I would say it's probably less about that they went horribly wrong, and that it's just sort of a long, drawn out process, and sometimes things just break in the middle of it and they don't come to fruition. So I would say anybody that's working on collabs out here, at least from, I don't know, maybe everything you guys do is great, but they very often don't come to fruition, and that's all right, and people waste their time, and it's I guess fine, but it seems to be the case quite often where it's a pretty complicated process, and you have two full companies working with all of those people on both sides of two companies, that it makes it fairly difficult to execute. So if you can execute it, awesome. If it doesn't happen, that's all right. Move on to the next one and see if the next one can happen.
Yeah.
Thank you. On pricing, what does that shared equity revenue model look like, or what's successful? Is it like a CPA model, or is it just licensing, or how does that look, and how does that work well?
I'd actually be curious for you guys. For us, typically it's if it's a license, then it becomes based on a subscriber revenue stream for us that we pay out on that first box. And actually, even if it's a single SKU sale, it's typically a percentage, right? And there's certain ones that will charge more than others, and it depends. When we get into negotiations, we bring a lot of social clout to the game, and we've got over 8 million followers and things like that, and so we do talk more than just the hard numbers. Depends on the trade-offs. We are a little bit more flexible with some than others.
Yeah, it kind of, maybe two aspects of it. One, we traditionally work on a royalty model with our partner, which is how we operate there. And then you're talking about consumer pricing. We usually operate pretty closely to where North Face pricing is because we have such a mature distribution network now. Like it's pretty known what our jackets cost. Now, granted that there can be some scrutiny there because sometimes these collabs have added cost or whatever it is, and they have a higher price point. But yeah, in general, we stick pretty close to what those North Face prices are, unless there's some, added innovation or some added technology in there.
Yeah, I think part of your question was how do you, as two companies, sort of split up the pricing as well, too? Right. 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 I mean, you're basically working together as a group to do a project. So I would say it's generally pretty open, and I think it depends on the company you're working with. Like very often, if we make a product and then the other company makes a product, they'll sell it into accounts, they'll sell it direct, we'll sell it into accounts, we'll sell it direct, and then we'll very often buy the product from each other. At like wholesale or whatever pricing that we agree to, and then we'll sell a kit that way. So that's typically how we do it. We very often don't do much licensing, but we have done it in the past. But I would say typically that's how we do. Like we make a product, they make a product, we sell it to each other, and then we sell it, right? And if we have accounts that are existing, like wholesale accounts, we'll kind of split that up too, and we'll sell in product to them, and then sell in for them as well. So.
And I think just quickly building on that as well, so there's, you three talk about sort of brand collaborations. Mike, you're more licensing, sort of pulling IP. And then in the Crocs world, it's a lot of influencer partnerships where Post Malone or Justin Bieber will sort of make a clog. And in those instances, there's an upfront payment to the talent. There's essentially a commitment from them to co-market the product, so some guaranteed spend as well against that. And then a traditional sort of royalty where they get a percentage of sales. Any other questions before jumping into the process?
Thanks. This is for those who have a strong retail presence. How do you, or maybe you don't at all, but how do you try and bring in some of your retail partners, your physical locations into the brand partnership? Even BarkBox, you mentioned being at physical locations at Subaru. This is a big deal for those of us in the outdoor industry that are selling through to wholesale. We want to support those partners as well. So curious how you jumped out of the digital space into the real world.
Yeah, I'll cover that first, which is when we negotiate licensing, we talk about whether or not retail can be included in there. If it is, then we create exclusive product for the retailers so that the experience at Target is different than our D2C site.
Yeah, it's a big conversation. I think the one thing that maybe to add on there is segmentation. So we spend a lot of time making sure we get the right product in the right channel. What you see at Dick's Sporting Goods is going to be slightly different than REI. It's slightly different than the NorthFace.com or North Face stores. So depending on the distribution agreement that we agree to with the partner, then that really informs what the in-store destination is going to look like. It's negotiated from the start, and it's kind of part of the agreement on who's going to sell it to that distribution. Is it going to be the North Face selling it in, or the partner selling it in? And then also who's going to invest in that experience? Is it the partner brand or the North Face? And all of that really actually gets, we're transitioning into process, but all of that really gets discussed before design begins. It's happening more on like a business decision. So it's very clear once we're making the product, we have a very clear understanding of where it's going and who's paying for that and what that experience would feel like.
We've got a little over 20 minutes left. Any other questions on the whys before jumping into process? We'll give it one more. Getting to work. You got it? Okay.
Yeah, I think when is it too early to do a collab when you're a new company? And I think a lot of our early customers were in Colorado, and then our first collab was a lot of New England customers, and they were a little bit older. And so there was a little bit of a disconnect sometimes where the customer that's been with the other brand longer is kind of used to their like DNA and vibe, and then they're like, jean shorts for biking, like that's so weird or something, you know what I mean? So sometimes, yeah, I feel like, you know, and then if, say you pick two really small brands and the customers of each brand didn't know the other one at all, it's like too many degrees of separation. So I feel like, you know, if I like know the North Face and like own their product, but I've never owned Gucci, but I've heard of it, then it's like enough of a connection, I feel like. So you still have to do that in your own kind of micro way where the people are like intrigued that you're including this like buddy along for the journey with you, and it makes sense to them too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's probably not too early. I would say it just really depends on the strength of both brands. And that's not necessarily the awareness of both brands. It's sort of like the cool factor they bring and the quality of the product they bring. So I would say that, you know, working with an unknown brand, if they have really amazing stuff that nobody's ever seen before, is amazing from a brand, especially like you're saying, is like, oh, we found this brand, we're cool because we found this brand, we know what's cool, right? So like from a bigger brand perspective, you can get cred from that, you know, end, and then if you're a smaller brand, you get cred because you get exposure from the bigger brand, and the bigger brand picking you and legitimizing you too. So as long as you have a good brand, it's great, you know?
All right, awesome. So let's dive into the process. You know, Stephen and Mike, you mentioned this is something that takes over 18 months. Jed, you mentioned that there's so many internal stakeholders and that things sort of break down a little bit. I guess, Stephen, I'll start with you, and maybe you can peel back the cover on the Gucci partnership or a different one, but walk us through it, like soup to nuts, what goes into bringing something like this to life across product development, you know, go-to-market support, teasing out post-campaign, you know, making sure that you're selling the customers that you brought in, you know, additional products. Just like, go for it. Peel the veil back.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm an expert at this territory yet. It's a learning every day, but I would say it is really, really hard because you have these two companies working together, and I think defining roles and responsibilities is super important to do at the start. And that's both internally. So we have what we call like a Collab pod, and it's basically like the minimum number of people at your company that you need to execute this. If you have one or two too many, there's a lot of suddenly new stakeholders, and so you really have to define that pod, and whether it's their only job or a portion of their job, really kind of empowering them to run with all of marketing or run for what and speak to what design is and merchandising. So that's kind of the first most important thing. And then it's really negotiating and coming to an agreement with that other partner before you're getting to a design phase. I think we call it the deal memo, and it's just basically who owns distribution, who owns marketing, you know, who's selling it in, all those things that when you have product in front of you, it gets a little more contentious, but before that, you kind of need that grounding foundation. I think, and when, you know, we mentioned a lot about tying this to inline objectives, making sure that, you know, there's a place in your brand for these new consumers that you bring in. That's really important, and it's really important to align on those objectives before you talk about partners. So, you know, no one, you know, it's very easy to debate, you know, whoever it is, Justin Bieber or Harry Potter, but it's actually much more important to make sure that you have the right objectives sitting underneath who that partner is, because partners go away, partners don't work out, and you still have these big brand and important things you need to accomplish that shouldn't be tied just to one person. From there, it's about this kind of little magic fairy dust that happens when you have those two teams together, and you make things that you wouldn't necessarily make on your own, but it's all that front work that I think that is really important on the upfront side before you actually start making something to make the creation actually happen. And the way the process unlocks the creation.
Yeah, I would say the more you do that work up front, the more the creative process and the working together as a company is a lot more. I'm not gonna say it's fun, but it's like it is a lot more fun, right? Because you've sort of ironed out all of the contentious issues at the beginning, and then you can actually just work on the project after that. That's one thing we learned the hard way. when we first started doing it, we sort of like, I don't know, let's just start talking about something, and then let's sort of work on these things, and let's like work on the product, and then let's work on like the sales strategy, and then it just got really difficult as it went through, and I would say it made a lot of the process not very fun, and it was just really laborious the entire time. So if you can take that time and just really outline it up front, I'm sure you guys do that a lot. Then you actually, when you're working on the product and working on the marketing and spreading the word about it, it's a lot more enjoyable for sure.
Yeah, all of that plus I would say really it's like why not do this partnership? Like real reasons why not to do the collaboration is something that we talk about quite a bit. And I think having that kind of that other point of view, even if you're championing whatever the partnership is, reasons to not do it are also really important, so that everyone is aware of, hey, this has been decided, this is the route we're going, and we've thought about these things. And if we can't answer the reasons why, like how we turn those no's into positives, or like how we manage that, then typically, if it's not unanimous, we typically won't do it. And I think we evaluate a lot of partners before they come to us, because we don't want to be pushed into a partnership and already brought down the path of like, oh yeah, this partner reached out to us, like clearly they want to work with us. Like yes, but we've got to also do our own vetting and our own evaluation. Would this partner land us where we want to be, versus like, oh yeah, they've told us that they're willing to work with us. Like, no, let's have that debate.
So I guess we've talked a lot about internal alignment and getting cross-functional teams to,
Yeah. I mean, we design all of our toys. If creative freedom isn't there, that's like immediate no. Pricing is typically a huge one for us. I mean, we should bring up the question that you had before of like things that have not worked, or partnerships and product that we've developed. Like we've had a lot of product that we develop, we put POs in, we make it, and then we decide, hey, we don't have a voice in like the political atmosphere where it is. So we don't even launch toys, even though previous years political toys have done very well for us. Like, so if a brand, if they don't align with us, we typically won't launch. And especially if we can have a unique voice into that brand and making it exciting.
So building more on team alignment, Elliot, given that you run design, product, manufacturing, marketing, it must be a little different for you. So can you speak to the sort of the collab process, soup to nuts for a smaller brand like Ripton?
Yeah, I don't really do everything, but we do max out our bandwidth pretty often. So we've done 2 collabs total for that reason, but a couple kind of didn't work out. But we're putting it on the design, development, and production teams to be able to figure these things out for us. Like sublimating a graphic onto like a pair of jeans is basically what we're doing. So our manufacturing partners primarily in Turkey, and that facility needs to do some experimentation and make sure that it can kind of like look cool and come out the way we want. Just kind of squeezing it in at the end of the day and trying to make it happen, because it has been really positive and a good sort of expansionary strategy for early stage business.
So Jed, I guess a question for you. Can you speak to, or the broader panel, like best practices for launch day essentially, and the marketing? I mean, is this just you put it out on your site and hope there's a pickup? Are you doing weeks of press beforehand? Like how do you ensure that the launch sort of matches the integrity and quality of the product?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the product. I think someone had a question about how we integrate with smaller retailers. Like very often we'll do a project with them, and that doesn't necessarily warrant like a really big press like blitz that we're going to talk about it. It actually feels better if it's just us talking about it, as 2 brands, and they're going to spread it like really organically that way. Any of the bigger brands that we work with, we typically, do like any big product launch with them. We hit up press, we seed out product ahead of time if we have it, and really just treat it like any other big launch. And hopefully we can get into the hands of some influencers anybody else that'll spread the word that's sort of friendly to the brand, or that both of our brands have access to. That's a big one for us as well. But definitely talking about the thing is very, very important, because if you don't have hype around it and people aren't excited about it and they haven't heard about it, it's typically pretty hard to just sort of turn it on and make it work. So,
Yeah, don't forget about time zones. It's really important to make sure you communicate that. Launch day, yeah, I agree with all those things. I also think like having a channel strategy is important. Like the whole story doesn't need to happen in any one place. You can use certain channels to drive people to the store where maybe it's happening, or certain, press can tell a deeper and richer story than you can in a short social caption. So having a plan around which channels are telling which piece of the story, and then before you make stuff so that it is really right for that piece of the story in each channel is important. And this also seems kind of silly, but also like allow yourself some time for storytelling. We've gotten into a good cadence where we announce, and then there's a period of storytelling, and then it goes on sale. Because if it is really hot and it sells quickly, like it kind of sucks to have all your storytelling go live after the product is already gone. So allow yourself a little bit of space in between announcement and the actual sale date.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. We sometimes will seed it out earlier to our existing customers, so that they could get it ahead of time. Obviously they'll champion us on social media and things like that. We do seed it out, and if from a paid channels perspective, where the world is, you got to ramp up. It takes a little bit longer than it used to be able to scale up significantly. So we do seed out, get some early learnings, pivot before launch day. And then the other aspect is, you don't want to have on your calendar just a successful day. How do you span that out? How do you capture, those people that arrive on the site and it's sold out? Typically if we sell out of something, we'll put on our website, we'll let you know when it's back in. And then we could typically rush an order, get it back in a couple months. We re-engage those customers. With that, you offer, hey, we're like, it's back in place. Do you want it? Are you a customer? If you are, great. We'll talk to you about how you can get that product through your add to box. If you haven't, typically we see some success with like a wave 2, so that first purchase order isn't as risky for us. And then we follow up. It also creates your email list. When we talk about partnerships, co-marketing is really important. So sending emails to your list, sending emails to my list, we grow our audiences in that way, especially as second-party data and things like that will be playing more of a critical role in growth marketing, I think, in the next 2 years here.
Awesome. So we've got about 10 minutes left and a few more things to cover in terms of, evaluating success and also about the future of the space and where things are headed. But before that, any questions from the group in terms of process?
So this might be like an obvious question, but how do you guys get those initial collaborations? Are you just reaching out to people via email? Do you get a particular name of the person, the company who's responsible for collabs? Kind of, what's that whole process like?
For us, it's a little all of the above. The personal relationships go a lot longer and are more fruitful. I also think we've tried to be more proactive. Like, who do we like in our seasonal planning or multi-year planning? Who do we want to work with, and what do we do to get on a path to get there? I think, but sometimes it's a LinkedIn message. Sometimes it's a bump in at a party or whatever it is. It's all the above.
Yeah, I think it depends on what it is. We have a licensing lead at the organization, so that will be big partnerships. But for me, it's LinkedIn messages, and it's we layer on, like, we've got our organic social team, our growth marketing team, we've got our continuity team and so we overlay our priorities, and we talk about who's best to champion and who's best to lead a certain project, and then you go and you just track down people, you make intros, you jump on in groups that open up this discussion.
And just with a Crocs lens for a second, like, it's a little silly, but sometimes having an internal champion, whether it's a friend or someone who's going to kind of push it through, because it's easy to just sort of pass something off to the licensing lead. But if you've got somebody that really believes in this and wants to help push it through, I wouldn't underestimate the role of an internal champion.
What's a realistic expectation from like that initial let's do
So the question was around timeline from idea to execution.
It really depends what you're trying to do. I mean, if it's a straight transaction, purchase to then resell in that way, pretty simple. But if it's, hey, we want to develop for us a product with you, and same with you, it takes legal, it takes teams talking, how does everything align nicely? And most of them die on the vine because of that. It is something, just doesn't match up.
What do you mean by pretty simple?
For me, I think our fastest partnership, if fulfillment could be by another company and we just receive codes and we could follow up with a code for customers, I don't know, 2 weeks has probably been our quickest, which is quite incredible.
Not for us.
If it's product being involved, things like that, I think the fastest we've had has probably been like 6 months, but that's incredibly limited inventory. Like that's a rush order. That's like, hey, we want to hit this moment.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. So I'm a new lawyer, and so I was curious about the role that legal plays in the collab or while you're negotiating and doing that stuff before design.
Yeah, super important. We have a legal counterpart in our pod, as I called it, and it's really important to have them there from the start, I would say. It's also like just a very, I don't know, maybe this is naive, but it's a very like relationship-oriented project, and I do find that like legal, when legal gets involved, especially if they're involved late and they don't have the context of starting from scratch, we've gone down this path where suddenly it becomes very ratcheted and elevated in terms of the conversation, and so that's why we made the decision to involve legal from the start, and they ultimately help us negotiate these deal memos from the start. I think they're an important partner all the way through.
And I think one thing to think about too for everybody here is that once you put your name on a product, it's basically out there as a product. So if you're putting your name on a product that's outside of your space, like we typically do, you're not thinking about all the things that you think about in your space, like your name being on a product that's similar to another product that has the same name as your product that you never thought about before because it's not in your realm of thinking, right? So there's a lot of that stuff too that legal is really good to think about of like, hey, if you're gonna make a car, you're gonna make a dog toy or whatever, you are putting your stamp on that as a brand as well, and you have to play within the rules of that space and the other brands that live there, and the legal implications that if the dog toy has an issue with it, like you're part of that, all of those things too. So not to put like a wet blanket on it, but it's like it's pretty important to have someone like you involved in that to think about what the implications are in context for both of those, as well as like the inter party stuff. Hopefully you're at a spot where you're working with a brand that you're not going to run into a bunch of legal issues with them because you're friendly enough with them, right? But there's that stuff too, just ironing it out to be like, yeah, if it blows up and you guys didn't really iron out how you're going to pay each other, or who is getting the money at the end of the day, that tends to be a little bit of an issue for people at some point,
So over the last 5 minutes, I guess, a lot of work goes into sort of building these, but how do you know if they're successful? Is it as simple as, hey, it broke through the culture or it didn't? I mean, is it very campaign by campaign? Like walk me through evaluating success for a year and a half's worth of work.
I think just that people are excited about it and bringing new customers into your brand and seeing some sort of elevated demand or sell through in that product because people, you guys were asking about retailers, like the collabs we've done. We haven't even been able to get them into retailers because they just like sell pretty quickly. So for where I'm at, that's great, but probably different for you guys.
Yeah, I think they're also different and you don't have to do collabs, right? Like there's not a law out there that says you have to do collabs. So I think however you determine success with them is really, really important, right? So setting that out, sometimes you're wildly surprised by success that you wouldn't have normally expected with something too. So it's really, yeah, like what you determine as success for each project, and each project has a different, I think, set of goals with it too. So.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, and sometimes those metrics of success can be like pretty fun, I think. Like we had a collab in the running space, and we had people at UTMB and Mont Blanc and Chamonix counting shoes. And they did it the year before because we knew it was coming. And so we were like, okay, did we change the number of shoes that we ran on in Chamonix? And there's a lot of serious metrics. We look at Google Trends and we look at sell-through and engagement online and all that stuff. But I think sometimes those little nuggets that you can just like go to a meeting with, or bring the story to like its head in one simple sentence, are the ones that we always look for each project.
Yeah, and coming from a subscription side of things, I mean, we evaluate to be profitable, we've got to have a subscriber stay for X amount of months, right? So proving out the path to profitability with those customers that we bring in, although it could be a peak day, our earliest indicator is our NPS of whether or not retention will be there, and then it becomes that quality of customer. I'm a big fan of like Pete Fader and how do you upsell, how do you cross sell those like the quality of your customers that you're bringing in. Licensing plays a huge factor in that for us. And we do know certain licenses, certain chords bring in better audiences than others.
So we've got a minute left. We're getting the boot, but I'm curious. So at Crocs, we've had instances where we've driven over 500,000 entries for a product that we have 800 units of, right? And it's like we celebrate the fact that there's tens of millions of dollars in demand, left. Although I mean that like hurts me. But is it important to artificially constrain supply for Collab products?
I'm not a good one to answer this.
Yeah, I think so. I think we look at, one of the metrics we look at is what stuff resells for, on the secondary market. And I think that sort of constraint is part of the game.
Yeah, nobody wants a bunch of Collab product on the clearance rack, right? So I think overall you always want to plan for that it will sell out, it will create demand, and people are super hyped on it. So I would say that's like the nice answer, right? Is that we're going to make enough to where people still can get it and it sells out pretty quickly and people feel good. I'm not as big a fan of the like super limited stuff that just drives massive craziness, and that's the goal of it. So.
And for me, I think if you're forecasting correctly, you selling out of all of your product, that means you've reached your goal. So it's a good sign to sell out, to say, hey, sold out, next time, I think the company Our Place does a very good job about that, like, hey, it's back type of messaging. Like, they're clearly managing their inventory in that way of like, let's just play it safe. And I think that's actually a pretty good approach. Interesting category, but I think it's a good approach for their inventory management.
All right, well, thank you guys. I have so looked forward to this conversation. I'm really glad that we got to have it. Hopefully the panel will stick around for a couple minutes just to answer any questions that you guys have off the side, but we are getting the boot. So thank you, everybody.